What you can do, sing a song and tell or two. Let's get together at the rendezvous.
Yeah. You guys want to do that one more time? Can we do it one more time? One more time. Okay, now it's your turn, and that's what's going to happen at Rendezvous tomorrow night. So a couple people lined up, but I need a few more campers with your talents and tricks and your tales. You're going to come talk to me? Because don't make me call on you. Okay.
The words of the song, if you haven't caught it, are rendezvous, rendezvous. We want to see what you can do. Sing a little song, tell a tale or two. Let's get together for a rendezvous. Thank you, Betsy.
Okay, one more time. This time I want to hear you. Okay? This time I want to hear you.
Here we go. Rendezvous, rendezvous. Want to see what you can do. Sing a song, tell a tale or two. Let's get together for a rendezvous.
Great. Tonight, are you guys ready for Monday Night Rendezvous? Have a little drum roll. I'm going to turn the mic over to one half of the Bob McQuillen Monday Night Extra for the Rendezvous. Give it up for David and Penn.
Do I get my own? Do I have my oh, jeez. Thank you. Sort of catching my breath. Bob McQuillen and his I'm sort of tearing up, so I apologize in some ways. He was a very dear friend of ours. I didn't think of this isn't on film, is it? Oh, Jesus. Okay, great. I began country dancing in 1977. And like some of you probably were dragged to this thing, you didn't know what it was. And then you were kind of the last person to leave, kind of thing. And so, very first dance I went to was actually an English country dance. Don't tell everybody. And then the second one I was dragged to really was one in New Hampshire with Douglass Tomczak. And I got really excited about that. And then I found myself, this was like in July of '77, I signed up for a weekend in the White Mountains, in a place called Cardigan Lodge. And I figured this is the way I'm going to learn how to do this, is to go for a weekend. And it turned out to be an English country dance weekend. Taught by and led by a fellow named George Fogg. And I'll never forget for two reasons. One is, though I left English country, after that, once I ran into swinging, I always thought it was a great building block for country dancing, for a whole lot of things. But the other thing is, what I really took away was the weekend experience. And so when I came out to Spokane, back to my home, I knew that no one would know how to country dance. So I prepared myself by recording everything. So after I got sent by country dancing, I danced 5 nights a week in Boston. So I went to Scout House on Sunday and Monday, Burger May on Tuesday. Wednesday or Thursday was Todd Wimmore's dance, originally at the YWCA in Cambridge. But then I would do something different, which is I would go to New Hampshire. I really loved the small towns, and so I would go through the Nannon Valley on Highway 101 and dance in places like Dublin, Francistown, Peterborough. And that's probably where I first met Bob McQuillen. And what stood out about Bob, or Mac as he was called, was he was a huge presence. You know, some piano players are just sort of, not all piano players, but if you knew McQuillen, you knew that there was someone doing something because he made lots and lots of noise and laughing and everything else. So I also went to, is it Williams? Where did Duke play? Fitzwilliams, and I would go there too. And he would play with a guy named Duke Miller. And Duke always did the same dances. And he was famous for that. Weekly dances in the summer. He was a PE teacher, I believe. Originally, it was summer up there in Fitzwilliams, which is Western Massachusetts. And Mac always played with him. And of course, Jake, for example, was always the first dance after the break.
No, Money Must.
Or Money Must. So, of course, Jake was winning.
Because was always before the break.
That's it. And so, there was one tune in particular that Mac hated. Life on the Ocean Wave. That was a singing square. And Mac at one point,
cross over and by the gentleman's stand, and beside two ladies cross over and take the old man's hand. And Mac played it every week for 26 consecutive summers, except
this one time, he said, "God damn it, Duke, I'm not going to play that goddamn tune." So that's kind of the presence that Mac had. And I'm sure other people have stories like that too. But so I was recording all this stuff from 1978 to the time left, which was the end of '79. I kept those things, and I listened to them, and I learned how to call. I'm not going to tell you my life story because my wife is here. She's just going, no. So, but one of the things I did was that in retirement, I took all those tapes and I listened to them all, and then I sent them to the Ralph Page division at University of New Hampshire because they were very interested in all the music that I recorded. But one of them was this dance in 1978, and it was Mac's birthday party. And I had forgotten that, and it was his 55th birthday, it was 1978. And I remember the dance distinctly. It was in Dublin. We used to dance in the town hall on the second floor, but this dance was in a church across the street. It was in the basement. And Mac was just, you could hear him in this tape just going on and on and on. So I came back to Spokane, started country dancing here. Fortunately, Bob Childs was there. Does anyone know who Bob Childs is? Great fiddler. He came to Spokane and he learned how to make violins here in Spokane when we used to have a violin repair program at our community college. A number of people came through that. Armin Barnett taught there. Anton Smith was the teacher for Bob. And so I met Bob, and thank God, because my repertoire, what I knew was all the kind of the urban country dances that were really popular in the 70s and stuff. And Bob came from a tradition in Maine of just real simple community dances. And so I learned so much from him that first 6 months. And then he left, and that's when I started call. And then I got frustrated fairly quickly because we were doing one dance a month, and people might miss 2 months. And this was the time when he would say ladies chain, and nobody knew what he meant. So we really started from a very basic thing. Sylvia was there, so she remembers. And so I thought of Carnegie Lodge, and I thought of that experience. And so this is how Lady of the Lake came about, because one of the bands, the banjo player, and Jeff Sykes, I don't know if people know him, but Jeff was a fantastic fiddler here, moved back to Missouri. But the banjo player in his band lived in Harrison, and she talked about this camp. So that's how we got here. So that was 1981. And the first year, Sylvia almost killed me because we started this thing, and she, like 3 weeks before, she came up to me at a dance and said, okay, man, how many people do you have signed up? I said, I've got 20. And she said, and then I said, and 19 of them are women. And she said, if you don't get any more men, I'm going to kill you. So that dance, I went around to all the men and offered them huge discounts. So we ended up with about 40 people. And then after that, it really caught on. And lots of people came from Seattle because other than an English country dance weekend, that's the way it started in Portland area, we were the only dance weekend. And so by 1980, and what my mission was to bring New England music to this area. So up until then, most of the musicians, and it was a very active time, were either playing old time or Irish, but they weren't playing really New England style music. So I was intent on that. Fortunately, Laurie Andrus moved into the area, so it was easy to hire him. We had Brad Foster because he was coming out to visit his father who lived in Seattle, so we did a bunch of piggybacking. Well, in 1984, we decided that, and at this point it was still being helped and umbrella by the Spokane Folk Society, we decided to go big time. So we brought out Ted Snell. You'll notice that we have a box right there. Well, the original box is a little bit smaller. And we built it in 1984 because if you knew Ted, you knew that he was maybe 5'6". And so he always had a box. So we had to build a box for him. And then ever since we had people signing our stuff. So that's our second box. And we all have our staff sign that. But we also brought Bob McQuillen out. And we brought him out with a band, what's it called?
No, New England tradition.
New England tradition, and this is the one with Pete Colby and April Limber, and they were just true New England spirits. April was such a kick. Hey, Penn, did you hear the joke about, she just had this filthy jokes, but a hell of a fiddler, and they just were such a great band. So we brought them out, and Matt fell in love with this place, and if you remember, there is the piano in Forster, and that's what the piano we used. We didn't have electric pianos, and the dances were all held there. And we had the band set up right as we walked in, so the band was always saying, because it was the middle of October, this was our fall weekend, shut the doors, it's too cold. We did move it down to the fireplace because the fireplace was being used at the time. So Mac loved us so much that he, after, and Eric, the manager at the time, the director, told me this, he sent Eric money to have the keys refixed on that thing. So he immediately sort of became really involved with Lady of the Lake. And then in 1986, we decided, and at this point, Deborah and I were together, and we decided to do a June camp, a week-long camp. And so the first person I called was Ted Snell. And I said, Ted, we're going to start this camp, we want you to come. And he said, kind of really would like to, but I can't, I'm busy with something else. And I said, okay, we'll wait until next year. We won't start the camp until you can come. And there was this pause. And he said, let me get back to you. So he called me about 2 days later and said, I've never had anybody ever do that, and I'm happy to come. So we started in 1986, and of course, we had Matt come. And I'm trying to think, he probably would know, but Pete Colby died of a brain aneurysm, and April passed away. I'm not really wanting to get into it, but I think it must have been around that time because we didn't have them come out. It was Laurie Andrus and Kathy Whitesides who connected with Bob, and they became his West Coast band for many, many years on that. So Bob came out in 1986 and stayed at our home, and every time he would come to Lady Lake, and as I think I remember I told you, he's probably, at least from the East Coast, he's come to more camps than anybody else. He would always stay at our house. And so I want to get my wife up here to recount one story. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm on a roll. First of all, Mac never wanted to sleep in any of her beds. I'll just sleep on the couch. Oh, come on, there's a bed for you. Just a couch. So, slept on the couch. The first time we met Deborah being the gracious hostess she was, she said, would you like some tea? He said, yeah, I'd like some tea. This is Mac. And she said, well, I have all these teas, herbal teas. And he looked at her and said, I want tea. And of course, what he meant was Lipton tea. And so I don't know if we had any at the time or not. We did not have any. But ever since then, the two of them would send boxes of Lipton tea to one another for years. Just no notes or anything, just Lipton tea would come. And that was the first, I believe the first tune that he ever wrote for us, and it's called Tea with Deborah. And then I wrote a dance that goes with it as well. And you called it back at Ralph H.
Tonight.
Yeah. Oh, good. Good. Maybe I'll dance. I've never danced it before. So that would be fun. So that was Tea with Deborah. And our children, Louise and Pierce, got to know Mac during that course of time too. And my daughter, when she turned 21, she's an avid dancer and musician, and she and a couple other young people, including Sarah Staben, who is floating around, are the leaders in our August week called Dance Some More. But she said, Dad, I want to go back east and dance the way you used to dance. So I took her to Francistown, but of course we stopped at the Mac Shack in Peterborough. And knocked on the door, no answer. But the car said, knocked on the door, opened the door, yelled in, hey Mac, and you could hear this voice, I'm way back here. So we go through his house, and have anyone been in the Mac Shack? Okay. The Mac Shack is so filled with so much crap. It's just unbelievable. There's no room for anything. And he kept everything, stacks of stuff.
Mac collected accordions, whether they were playable or not. He liked the way they looked. I made a film about it. We'll talk about that. But it took 3 visits for me to his house to realize that he had a kitchen. Because the accordion cases were stacked up so high, it made a wall. You couldn't see the kitchen there. And he never used the kitchen because he was always at the Peterborough Diner.
Yeah. So we wind through this house with all this stuff. And he's literally in the bathroom, and he's taken a plank, and he's put it across the top of the toilet and the sink, and he's repairing an accordion. So then we come out, and we sit and we visit. This was a year before he died. And I'll only say that he did mention, we said, what are you up to? So I'm writing a tune for every town in New Hampshire, and we'll follow up on that. So that was the last time we saw Mac live, and then when he passed away, Louise and I again came out to his memorial service, and it was pretty amazing to celebrate Peterborough, and there was at least 500 people there, and they asked people to stand up, and I bet there was 150 people from the West Coast that flew in. The other Mac story related to it was that in 1983, just remember, I was at his 55th birthday. In 1993, he turned 70, and he was here on staff. And so we had this big, huge party for him. We were in the process of building the pavilion at the time because we started, Deborah and I had started a family camp once we had Louise. She was born in 1991. So we decided we needed to do a family camp, and there's lots of stories there, but Deborah's going, no, let's not talk about those. But there was a subfloor because they hadn't put down the fur yet. So we wrote lots of things about Mac, and Ted Snell was there. Ted wrote a lot of stuff, so if at any point we have to tear all that up, all that stuff is there, so it's very cool. But it's the only time, because philosophically I have an issue with auctions and CDSS. I forgot to tell Norm about that, so that's a little thing we'll talk about. But we did have an auction because we made party hats. And Mac's party hat was this accordion someone made. It was just spectacular. And so we decided, as a way for a fundraiser for this pavilion, because Lady of the Lake building for NCSM, we have done a number of things. The book, or the shoe boxes there are for Lady of the Lake. Once that was the first thing we ever did. This floor is part of Lady of the Lake's effort. So we fundraised, and I think Mac's, this was 93, his hat went for $1,000. So we raised lots of money. And we had Mac forever, and he wrote tunes. If you're familiar with his tune writing, he always dedicated to people. So I think we have about 10 tunes that are related to people that were on the organizing, like CC, Chris, and Susie were all on our original organizing committee. Wrote tunes for them. We wrote a Lady of the Lake Waltz. He then wrote Tea with Deborah, and then Randy Crow, who was our director forever. Randy got one, and Farley the dog got one. So so we had a bunch of them that way. So that's our story about Mac, and I think he came until he was probably, because he died when he was 90. Yeah, I bet he was on staff until at least 80 years old when he came. So he started in 84 and came through probably 2004 or something like that, or 14. But anyway, that's so Mac is really important to this camp. He just sort of spiritually is there and really supported us, and we loved him.
One of the things that Penn didn't mention except in passing, McQuillen started playing. He was a Marine in World War II, and then was a failure at finding a job. And when the Korean War came along, he re-upped. But after he got back from the Pacific in World War II, he started dancing. Ralph Page was calling dances there, and after a while, he said, he went up to Ralph Page and said, if I brought my accordion, could I sit in? And Ralph told him, bring it next week and let's see. And he did, and he got hired and became part of Ralph Page's New Hampshire band. Ralph had the Boston Boys, and then there. And so Mac played accordion for many, many years. And it was with Duke Miller that he then started to play piano. So he's this pivotal musical figure who sort of links a very traditional New England sound and style. Mac's, we'll probably have some people who talk about Mac's very unornamented style of playing the piano. And because he was such an inspiration to many of the younger people who came on, Rodney among them, who recorded an album with Mac, just the two of them. After Ted Snell died, I was I was sad. Ted put an important caller in my life, and for years I had been thinking, someone should make a movie about Ted Snell, and then he had the temerity to die before he reached the age 70. And at that point, I realized that if you have a project that you think someone should do, you need to say that while you're looking in the mirror. And I looked around to think, who else deserves a movie about them? And McQuillen was the logical choice. It was McQuillen or Dudley, and I did Dudley later because his was a more complicated story. And I asked Mac, I said, I'm thinking about making a movie about you. And he said, no, you don't want to do that. And 6 months later, I said, I'm still thinking about doing a movie about you. And he again put me off. And it was about the third or fourth time where he just sort of stopped and said, you really want to do this, don't you? And I said, yeah. He said, all right, well, we'll do it because you want to do it. And from that moment on, I'd call him up and say, can I come on down and let's just drive around to where you used to live? And he was absolutely at my proverbial beck and call, although driving around with Mac was a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. We got in his Jeep and took off, and I'm hanging on a tripod on the floor, filming him while we're going. And we are barrel-assing around every dirt road in southern New Hampshire. I said, so I noticed you're not wearing your seatbelt. He said, last I heard, they're not required in New Hampshire. I mentioned he was a Marine. He had a loud voice. He worked in a school. He was a shop teacher in Conval in the Peterborough area. And he was in charge of the lunchroom. And he kept order in the lunchroom. In fact, he kept such order in the lunchroom that once someone was coming through inspecting the schools to see how things were going, and they came into the cafeteria, and things were just very calm. And they said, "Oh, this is very impressive. Who's in charge of the lunchroom?" And someone pointed, and Mac was sleeping on a couple chairs over in the corner. There was order in the lunchroom. He had that presence. Just one short story for me, and then we've got a bunch of other people. He was not a shy individual. And the first time that Silly Wizard came to the town where Sheila and I live, a small city, and performed in the Lebanon Opera House, which is a beautiful, beautiful hall. So Mac is there in about the 10th row, and Silly Wizard was just blowing us away. This was Johnny and Phil Cunningham. It was just this extraordinary high-level Scottish manic energy. And the concert's about 3/4 of the way over, and they finish a tune, and people are clapping, and the applause dies down, and the brothers are talking to each other about what they're going to do next. And Max stands up, right from the 10th row or 12th row, and at the top of his voice looks up at the stage and shouts out in a voice that could be heard throughout the entire hall and probably halfway across the Lebanon Green. He said, "I don't know whether you really are silly, but you surely are wizards," and then sat back down, and the concert went on. He was not shy about stating his opinion about anything at any time to anyone. So we had a bunch of people who wanted to say something. Vicky, Kevin, Margie, Kathy, Emily, and then Bill. Why don't some of you come on up here? Yeah. Let's go. Come on up. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
Do you have those?
I have a question, David.
Yes.
Do you think we have the means and opportunity to have a screening of that movie sometime this week?
We have the film here. We have to figure out when. We've got the technical capability of showing. The film is called Paid to Eat Ice Cream.
Yeah.
And that was McQuillen's sort of motto. And you say, well, why do you say that? He says, well, someone hands you a bowl of chocolate ice cream, says, we'll pay you $10 to eat it. That's a pretty good deal. He says, that's how I feel about playing for the music. So we've got the film here. It's about 70 minutes, and I don't know when we can find a time, but if we can find a time, we'll show it. Yes. Okay, Kevin.
All right, go. So I think I met Bob later well, certainly later in his life, but also later in my life. I just want to tell you about 3 little encounters I had with Bob that I witnessed. First one is at Folklife Festival. And I met Bob at the Festival of American Fiddle Tunes a couple times over in Port Townsend. And I was walking along the Folklife, and if you've ever been there, it's just crowds of people, and all of a sudden I see some, out of the corner of my eye, it looks like somebody who's maybe slipped and fallen and is quite old, and I look over, and it's Bob, just sort of sitting in the dirt. I said, Bob, what are you doing here? He says, you gotta be somewhere. The second of these things, when you talk about stories, these images came to my mind. The second time was when he came to a camp in Aptos, California. It's a Mauditonian camp. And there's a woman who's a dear friend, wonderful dancer, and great spirit named Patty Smolian. She had been told that Bob McQuillen was coming. She'd heard about him. And she said, well, what can you tell me about him? And the person said, well, he's He's fond of cursing. So I was getting out of my car, and I look, and here comes Patty, and here I see Bob get out of the car, whoever brought him to this camp. And Patty's got this 200-watt smile. And she walks up to Bob. She says, "Are you Bob McQuillen?" He says, "I am." She says, "Fuck you!" And Bob goes, "What's your name?" "Patty." "Well, fuck you, Patty." And all weekend, "Patty, fuck you." "Bob, fuck you." And the other thing I just want to say was, well, two more real short ones. At that weekend, there was a time when I think they were playing. I think he was playing with WB and Kathy and Lori. Thank you. But one night he said, I think it was Lori said, "Come, let's all join on stage and play one of Bob's tunes." And we're not going to tell him. So all the musicians came on stage, and then I think it was Amelia's Waltz, which is just a lovely waltz. And so one by one, they started playing it, and one by one, all the band members came up and just joined in. And he's playing the piano on his back. And then at some point, toward the end of it, just got wonderful. It swelled up, and it was just great. And he just turned around, and he looked impassive, but his eyes were wet. And the last thing was, I got to play a daytime session, I think with George Wilson and at Fiddleton's Festival. And this was not that long ago, so it must have been, I don't know what year he died, but it was pretty close. And the whole time, as we're sitting there, in between, he sort of nods off, and then George says, Bob. And he goes, "Am I dead yet?" No, Bob, now don't talk like that. George was like, "No, Bob. And he's like, "Well, you gotta think about these things." So, "What color hearse do you think I should have?" All the patter, sometimes you have a really good time with your band, just talking while the caller does what they do. And you're sitting there, and the whole patter was about his plans for his death, or, how he might go, and kind of stuff like that. You put all those things together, and you just get this picture of a very wonderful spirit.
Thank you.
I have a brief story about an encounter. One of the few conversations, it was a very short one that I had with Bob, who I met here and met in New Hampshire roundabout. And anyway, so I ended up sitting on a bench at Folklife, just outside the big dance hall there. And it's been a long day, and this band starts playing, and it's not your traditional contra dance band by any stretch, and it gets funkier and funkier, and there's a saxophone going on and on. And we covered some small talk. I said, "So what do you think of this music, Bob?" He says, "I hate it." And he gets up off the bench, and he strides over, and there are these giant garage doors on the side of that building that you can pull down in foul weather, and he's tall and rangy, and he reaches up and he pulls down this door, and he goes and pulls down another door and comes back and sits down next to me. That's better. Well, my story is from here because we were having a staff meeting at the end, a wrap-up session one year when he was here, and Rodney was here too. I don't know how that happened, but somehow they were both here, and Rodney had just played Dancing Bear. And he, I don't know if you've heard Rodney play Dancing Bear, but it's very wild. And Bob turns to him and says, "I don't know what you call it, but I'd call it Dancing Bear Turds."
I'm glad the ground has been broken for cuss words, because I was a polite Canadian, and I was part of the contra dance community in Toronto, and I read sheet music for piano, and someone said, you know, you can learn chording and play for contra dancing, and suggested I go to Camp Augusta, and Bob McQuillen was teaching a piano camp. So I did, and started off the class, and Bob yelled across the room, "Get your goddamn foot off that pedal or I'll bite it off at the ankle." That was my introduction. So then I said, "Bob, I'm really boring, I'm left brain, I can't make up music, I need chord charts, I just go boom chuck." He said, "Just give him the goddamn wham wham, that's all I want, the beat, the beat, the beat." I thought, okay. So finally, he hammered into me Johnny's move. Does that ring a bell? 1, 6, 2, 5. Ba, 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 ba. It was a thing he did. So I managed to play that, and over the whole dance hall, he yelled out, "Pure sex!"
Some tough acts to follow here. So, Mac didn't stay every time at your house, Penn and Deborah, because one time he was at our house. One of the more recent times, I think. Some of you who've been here long enough remember my husband, Gary Copeland, who, by the way, was the architect for this house and the pavilion. Well, Gary loved to cook, and I used to tease him that he was kind of like a little Jewish mother, because they'd always say, "Well, did you like it? How was it?" So we decided that for Bob, we were going to give him a special treat. Due to the inland Northwest, everybody loves huckleberries. They're a big thing around here. You've got to have your huckleberries. So Gary cooks these huckleberry pancakes for breakfast. And we serve them up, and Bob eats them, and Gary says, "Well, what do you think?" "Oh, blueberries are much better."
So, one last story. Mary DeRosier is a long-time New Hampshire caller, and she was at the New England Folk Festival one year, and was calling a dance one night, and Mac was part of the band. And in the morning, Sunday morning, they showed up at the local diner. Mac was already sitting in the back in the booth, and Mary walked in the door. Sunday morning, and everyone's in the diner, and Mac yells out in a voice that could be heard throughout the town of Natick. He says, "Mary, you were great last night."
I never actually got to meet Bob McQuillen, but he nonetheless had a pretty significant impact on my life, and that's specifically through one piece of music. Someone mentioned Augusta, Camp Augusta in West Virginia at Davis and Elkins College. And when I was in my teens, I would go there in the summers for Irish Week. And back in the day, Mac apparently used to go down there to play tunes with Billy McComiskey, who, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I was concerned at the time, was God. And I remember that was actually where I first contra-danced, although I didn't find out about how amazing contra-dancing could be until later. But I remember that it was tradition that we ended the last ceilidh at Augusta, the one with the student band, with a tune called the Augusta Waltz that had been written by Bob. And it was a tune that every musician here knows that sometimes a tune just, the first time you hear it, it grabs you by the throat and never lets go. And Augusta Waltz was maybe one of the first waltzes I learned, and to this day it's still my favorite. And about 10 years after I first heard it, my partner and I got to walk down the aisle to it. So I'll forever be grateful to Mac for this tune.
So I got started playing contradance music when I moved to New England in 1979, 1980, 82, something like that. And Bob McQuillen, of course, was legendary, and we all knew him. And I had met Ralph Page, who invited me to join a band for a dance he was doing at the Bremer May School. He heard me playing, he said, oh, you should come join us. So I went down to Bremer May, and there were two other clarinet players there, Bill Posse and Rich Blase. And I walked up to the stage. Bob was at the piano, just kind of. And I'm putting my clarinet together up on the stage right behind Bob, and he turns to me and he says, "You fixing to play that thing?" I should point out that this is an era when playing clarinet for fiddle tunes was considered a little bit off. I'm still suffering PTSD from some of that. So here's Bob. You're fixing to play that? I said, yeah. He said, well, who asked you? He said, Ralph Page. I was like, well, that's as good as any. And he looked back to it. And I was a little unnerved. And we sat, three clarinet players, a bunch of fiddlers. I think Rodney might have even been playing that night. And we played the first set, the first dance. And I swear to God, Bob leapt off the piano bench, turned to me and said, "Hi, I'm Bob McQuillen." And so we're going to play a tune. Bob and I actually became great sort of buddies. And he actually wrote a tune for me called Tomczak's Polka. I think this might have been played once in history, so we are sight reading. Bear with us.
And our music stand is down there because,
Yeah.
Turn it a little. No. That's good. How's
And
that?
don't move.
Move that finger back a little bit. There we go.
This is what clarinet player should do. You have to
Are you
say.
fixing to play that thing?
Oh, God. All right. Let's see if I can do this.
All right.
Excuse me. I was really, Penn said something about Bob's birthday, and I realized, wow, I'm older than Bob when I met him. What is this? Anyway, when did that happen? All right, let's see if I can do this.
Matt published more than 1,500 tunes in his lifetime. A posthumous volume of the tunes that were written, one for every town and city in New Hampshire, is coming out on the occasion of Quackfest. If you'd like to get a copy and support that event, Laura Anders and W.B. Reed are flying east to be in Peterborough on July 1st. If you Google Quackfest, K-W-A-C-K, Quackfest, you'll find it. There's also a project this year which is to have all of McQuillen's tunes played this year. And if you go to McQuillentunes.org, you'll see an extraordinary website which lists all the tunes. You can click on the tab and see which ones have already been played, so you know which ones are still remaining. At this point, more than half of them have been played by hundreds of people all around the country. And you can submit tunes. So some of the ones that everything that gets called here, played here, will get submitted to that. So McQuillentunes.org for any musicians who are interested in that. So thanks very much. Let's move the chairs out of the way and we'll get ready for our dance.